Hello and welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Right, so you should all be hearing me now. Yeah, just type in a Y on the chat if you can hear me okay. Everyone can hear me now? Just a quick check. If you just type a Y in the chat, fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Much appreciated. Sorry about that. Bit of a technical hitch there. Right, so the difference, who can tell me then what they think or what they believe is the difference between a private trust and a public trust? Anyone can want to hazard a guess of what they think the difference absolutely is? Who would like to let me know? Setting up my scribe for you whilst I'm waiting for some answers to come in. So I'm still waiting for some feedback. Is that no one knows? So public trust is registered. Okay. Um, all right. Anyone else want to hazard a guess? I've got two people say that they're registered. What do they mean by registered? And so I've got two screens. So if I'm not looking at you, it's because I'm looking at my screen. And so I'm not being rude when I'm doing that. Just there. So we've got public trust is on public record. A private trust keeps us in the private and public trust register. On Company's House. We've got complete newbie here. In fact, why don't I just show some of the responses? So private trust keeps us in the private and public trust register. We've got Company's House. By lion's share, public trust filling tax return, etc. And Marie says private trust is not disclosed to the government. We've got HMR, know about it. HMRC, UCC register. Okay. What else have we got here? We've got private trust keeps us in the private and public trust register. Start with welcome, Martin. Good to have you on board. Public trust is on public record. Okay, public trust is registered. Okay, interesting. So a lot of people think that the public trust, the difference between the public and private trust is registered and not registered. Okay, that's interesting to hear. So, I will let me define what I want to define what the difference between a public trust and a private trust is. I'm going to share my screen. Make sure my pen is working. That's going to be really important. Else we're going to be in problems. And then we can have some fun, as they say. Right, make sure my pen's actually working. Then yeah, it's working. Let me share my screen so you can all see it, and then we can. And obviously, I'm happy to take any questions that come on board. Obviously, so let me share my screen. I don't like that. Let's go back to something. Yeah, that's okay. All right, and I think you guys are probably going to struggle to see my screen, so just let me change the settings so you can see it a bit better. Is that better for you all, guys? Yeah, I think that looks a bit better for you all. Right. Okay. So, um, private trust, public trust. So, with a private trust, my definition of a private trust. Okay, so I'm going to put definition of a private trust, and this might surprise you all, but we'll see. Okay, the definition of private trust. It's all about jurisdiction. Okay, that's the kind of the buzzword, and effectively, it's outside of the UK. So you could argue that an offshore trust, okay, could technically be private, technically, because it's outside the jurisdiction of the UK, of the UK law. All right. So does everyone understand that? If I'm said that it's all about jurisdiction. So James says public trust requires financial transparency. So effectively, when I draft a private trust, there's a bit more nuance, to it than that, but that's the underlying foundation. I operate under the jurisdiction of equity, okay, which is a separate jurisdiction. Okay, it's not equal to the jurisdiction of what we call the common law, statutes and acts, etc. Right, it's outside. All right, they're two separate bodies of law that are recognised in the UK. Okay, so does everyone understand that? So maybe if I just type that. So private implies or equals and if I post that, then you can all see. So that's basically what I'm saying. So private basically means that's outside of the UK jurisdiction. So then, technically speaking, when you have a private trust, you are it's not subject to the rules of the land as long as it's not. And this is we've got to be very careful with equity. There's some rules or maximum of equity that you've got to follow. And one of them is that it does follow the law. Okay. So as long as you're not doing anything to conflict the law, i.e., doing something criminal, illegal, something that's going to hurt others, something that's unconscionable towards your fellow brothers and sisters, then you're not stepping on anyone's toes. But it doesn't mean that you have to abide by the common law of the land. So it's completely private. But then we get a bit conflicted, okay, and hence that's what I teach. So we've got to understand, well, what can I put in under the bracket of private, and what can I put in under the bracket of public, okay? So then let me do. So before I move on to the public, does everyone understand what I mean by private? Okay, so we've got Anne-Marie says use this interesting way to think of private. Okay, so any other? Does anyone have any questions about that definition of privacy? Because that's basically where I'm coming from. So it's outside of the public realm. Okay, so whether it's in equity jurisdiction, whether it's think of a diplomat. How does the let me share my screen again. You how do you have draw it here? Let's say this is London, and you go into central London. Is it Hanover Square? I think I can't remember now where the US embassy is. Oh, the new one. I can't remember where it's gone to now. But let's say US embassy. Why is that USA? Why is that the USA? As soon as you walk into their land in London, but you're on US soil. How does that work? All right, it's the same principle. All right, it's just all about jurisdiction. Okay, so therefore, the laws of the land in this patch of London is under US law and outside of UK law, so it can't be touched. They can't. So if you're a diplomat, let's say you're operating under a diplomatic immunity, diplomatic rights, and you step in there and you do something that's technically illegal under UK law, but they can't do you because you don't technically exist in the UK, so you can't abide by the UK rules. All right, it's all about jurisdiction. That's pretty much that's pretty much what it's all about. So if you have a trust which operates under a separate jurisdiction outside of the US, outside of the UK, outside of UK law, then that's what I would define as being private. Okay, and I operate with equity. Now there are some caveats to that, and that's where sometimes you need to understand where a public trust might then be more useful. Okay, so let's look at a definition of a public trust, and then we can see the differences. Because I think a lot of people shy away from public trust, and they think it's wrong or it's going to do them any harm. What I always say is learn the rules of the game, then you can play the game better. And I think maybe not everyone understands the rules of the game of what is defined as public or what's defined as private, and so then we might have the wrong, wrong or just coloured preconceptions of something, and that will enable us to make poor choices or not move forward at all on a decision that maybe could be beneficial to you. And at the end of the day, you need to understand both worlds because we exist in both worlds. Okay, effectively. So, so Jamie's, said that embassy analogy is the best explanation I've heard to date. So I'm glad it's working out, Jamie. Thank you for that. All right. So, the public. Okay, the definition. Well, you can all guess. Who wants to guess what the public definition is? Then, if I've explained what private is, what would public mean? Whilst I have a sip of tea, I want to see what people are going to come up with. Now that you've heard my definition of what private is, you might want to rethink the original definitions about being registered. So, who would like to have a guess at what they might believe is to be a public trust? I'll wait a couple more seconds, and if not, I'll jump into it because there might be a slight delay with me talking. Exactly. Yeah. Thanks, Emery. So it's under UK jurisdiction if you got a trust in the UK. If you're in Africa and you get a trust in Africa, then you're under the laws of whatever African state or continent, state or country that you're in. Okay. So, for example, I could be in, I don't know, Addis Ababa, for example, and the trust written in Addis Ababa might be private to one that's written in Nigeria. Okay, so again, it's understanding the rules. Okay, so exactly what was we saw. It is about the comes under the jurisdiction of the UK. So and that's pretty much, and so it becomes a lot more complex, unfortunately. I'm going to write that down. So under UK statute and acts, etc. So there's a lot more rules. Okay, and I can tell you because I'm operating both in both worlds. Okay, from I can see it from the private side where I've spent a lot of years studying, and I can see it from the public side where for the last 2-3 years as an estate planner and will writer. Okay, I can see both sides, and I write trusts. Well, I don't write trusts, but I produce trusts in the public and produce trusts in the private. And the only difference is the jurisdiction. And if you're in the public jurisdiction, then it's subject to far more rules. And the other issue, which will definitely be a big deal, is taxation. Okay, so it's just far more complicated, unfortunately. Extremely complicated, so to say. And the private side is actually quite simple once you understand how a trust works. All right, and most countries, especially offshore jurisdictions like, Belize or Virgin Islands or wherever, where they don't necessarily tax people, again, it's relatively simple. All right. So then you can utilize trusts in the right way to achieve the goals that you want to achieve based on what it is you're trying to do. All right. So and that really is the long and short of it. There are other caveats that you need to be aware of and be very careful about. So, for example, in my training, I get a lot of people ask me, they want to set up a private trust on the notion that they want to be outside of the public and live this private life, which I completely understand, but they want to put money in it. And I say, well, you can't do that. You can't put money unless it's, say, gold or silver, right, in a private trust. Now, can anyone tell me why I say you can't do that? I'm writing and you can't see my writing. I'm sorry. Okay, so what I'm saying is you can have the private side, which is really simple, and you got the public side, which, as I'm an estate planner, so I can see both sets of rules in both worlds. And the rules, okay, are far more complicated on the public side, but you can still achieve the same goal. You just need to know what you're doing or find someone who knows what they're doing. But ultimately, on the private side, one thing I said to a lot of my students, a lot of my members and Wealth Guardian, if they want to put money like in their bank account in a private trust, and I said, well, you can't actually do that. You're going to have problems. So, can anyone, based on what we just shared and what we just learned about the difference between public and private, can you understand in why putting money per se in a private trust is not going to work? So we've got a lot of answers coming through. So where are we going from? So right, so we've got lion's share, so trustee beneficiary that are all on the records for public. Not necessarily a public trust in the public. The only ones who are on the record, and even the private trust, certain elements need to be on the record anyway. The settlor, which is fair enough, the trustee, well, they need to be on the record because that's their job. The beneficiaries just need to be known by the trustees, but it doesn't need to be a public record, whether that's on a public trust or private trust. Okay. The rules are changing slightly, but I'll explain that in a bit. We've got rather squiffy that says private is unregistered. Public is also unregistered. I don't register trusts in the public. As I said, that is changing slightly, but I'll explain that in a minute so people don't misunderstand. There's no registration of trusts in the public, just so you're aware. I'm not sure where that's come from. That comes under UK law. So, and the question was why I wouldn't put money, cash, pound notes, etc., bank account, credit card money, whatever, in a private trust. So we were under commercial jurisdiction. Yeah, not the answer I'm looking for, but yeah, we've got registration number. It's right, but it's not what I'm looking for. Would the majority of trusts we encounter be public rather than private? Yes, absolutely. High Court Transferee Equity Division says Paul. Right, question: how can I use private trust for beneficiaries to access? I'll come on to that shortly. But part of the answer will come when you answer this question: why can't I put money in a private trust? Because that will kind of open your eyes. Because to access cash, so I'm actually answering your question indirectly, Anne Marie, as we go through. So, because the declaration that the grantor establish, not really. Cash is at IU. Yeah, we're getting there, but we have mentioned the word many times. Has anyone heard of the principle of commingling? Legal tender. Okay, we're getting closer. Paul says there's all trusts set up for beneficiaries. Yes, without a beneficiary, there cannot be a trust. All right. So the answer I'm looking for is because money is public. All right. I know it might sound really obvious, but that's a commingle. All right. So it does put some limitations on what, especially if I'm using equity jurisdiction. Okay. of mixing private with public. You can't do it. All right, that's a problem. That's a massive problem in trust administration eyes. So uh, hence it can be limited or limiting for a lot of people if they want to use private trusts um, for public species or public items. You just can't do it. And the reason why I say money is public, even though it's your money, again, if you just take out, if you still can withdraw money, we're going to a very digital age at the moment. But if you can remember how money, as someone put promissory notes, it's not yours, right? It's got the Queen's head. It's got someone else's signature on it. You didn't provide it. It's the fiat system that we're operating under that's recognised is not yours. You have rights to use it. Now that's different. The rights to use it is separate to the thing itself. But I don't want to get too deep or too I don't want to take you off course, so I say. So you can't just put, well, this cash I'm going to put in a private trust. That is defeating the whole object, because remember what I said. A private trust operates out in a different jurisdiction, so you can't just say, well, I'm going to put UK cash in it. It doesn't quite work. It's still, the rules are still bound, so you have to be very careful how you operate. No different to an offshore trust. If you're going to use offshore banking, then you have to operate in the denomination of currency where the offshore trust is recognized. Keeping it really, really simple. So we were very careful about that. So that's one example of why private trusts are good, but you just need to understand how they work. And if people are trying to sell you a trust and call it private, and you're putting your public stuff in it, now I've given you some ideas to kind of question, or will it really stand up to scrutiny if you're in a court of law? So questions are still coming through. Like, is Bitcoin? I guess Bitcoin may be included in fiat bridges. I'm not sure. I class Bitcoin as still private. It's under a private ledger. Yeah, it's yours. You own it. Okay, someone's mined it. You've purchased it, exchanged it, whatever you call it. It's yours. It's no different to exchanging your fiat currency for gold bars. But that gold bar is yours. It's not. It's not denominated in pounds or fiat currencies. It's Satoshi's is private as far as I'm concerned. It's not a public or fiat currency for certain. There's no statute that determines that Bitcoin can only be used for a public use. It was created for the people for a specific purpose, if you read the white paper. So I would argue that any kind of crypto, unless it's a public based crypto, like was it the US dollar Tether or whatever you call it, perhaps I might argue that, but pretty much I would say that's a public use. So again, we can have a longer discussion over that. Where are we? Another question come up. So precious metals are okay, not money. I mean, remember, it's currency. We class it as money, but it's actually currency. Money, real money, is precious metals, gold and silver, or whatever you define it to be, that you can touch, that's got some substance to it or value to it, that what you define. Okay, so you can place crypto into. I don't see why you couldn't. Yeah, as long as you know what you're doing. All right, you can put anything into a trust, whether it's tangible or intangible, whether you can touch, taste, or feel it, or whether you can't. You just need to understand what you're doing. Right, my bad. I mean, the BTC is the ultimate trust, but you need a fiat bridge. BTC has privacy issues. Yeah, okay, I get that. So legal tender bullion coins would be public. That's a very good question. Bullion with, for example, a coin, a bullion coin, because they've got someone's head on it. I'd say Caesar's head. So that could be defined as public, even though it's not currency per se. You still got to be quite careful how you define it. You can still put it into a trust. Don't get me wrong. It's just defining how you put it into a trust. Bars will be a lot easier. Yeah, but essentially bullion coins, especially UK ones, will be a bit. You're gonna have to define it in a different way. But it's still because they, for example, a sovereign, a silver sovereign or a gold sovereign, for example, they're capital gains tax free. So why would they state that unless they consider it to be some form of currency still in the UK? Does that make sense? Whereas if you had Maples or South African Cougaram, that could be private to a UK jurisdiction. So maybe you could put that in a private trust. Something to think about. Good question. Right, so that's why the bank don't sell it. The new tender. Yeah, I get that. I get that. Give to Caesar what is Caesar, exactly. And it's pretty much black and white once you know the name of the game. So that along and short is the difference between a private trust and a public trust. Now the registration. Let me just cover that really brief before we wrap up. Yeah, is my screen frozen? Let's see. Right, let's see if I can start again. Let me just come out of my screen. Right, so you saw me with my lovely Greek island, my dream place. Right, so effectively, registration of trust. I mean, there is law coming into place, I think, from next year for money laundering purposes, believe it or not, that public trusts will need to be registered, but they're not registering your private element of the trust, i.e., what the trust is doing. They're just registering who to contact if they need to know who to contact for a trust. Um, whether it's private or public. So let's give you an example. You could use a private trust to set up for, protecting your home or the equity in your home. You can do that privately. You can do it publicly, depending on what you're trying to achieve. It will still state that it's a trust, or contact this trustee, and the trustee might say, well, it's a trust, but they don't need to divulge the contents or the declaration of the trust. What the trust is doing or who the beneficiaries are. So the registration process, and it's still a bit up in the air for me in terms of what type of trust will need to be registered. But effectively, especially where money's involved, then yeah, there's going to be a registry for public trusts, and they want to know who's a trustee. Effectively, the trustee is, and what the trust purpose is for. But other than that, it's still private in terms of what it's doing, and it's more, who do we contact if we need to know who to contact regarding this trust. So I don't think it's still interfering with your privacy. Okay, so you're aware of that, but that's not going to negate the definition of what is private and what's public as far as the definition of a private trust and the public trust is concerned. All right, registration is nowhere near that, because you can have offshore trusts which will still be considered private in the UK, depending on what jurisdiction you are in, and the purpose of its use. All right. So I just wanted to kind of wrap that up so you all have an understanding of that. Let's see if there's any more questions that's come up at all. Yeah, but they both operate in the same fashion. So they will have a beneficiary, they will have a trustee, they will have a settlor. Okay, and so the administration of trust, the rules of trust will work regardless if it's private or public. That cannot change, and the trust is still governed under the jurisdiction of equity, and that's the only other difference between a private trust and a public trust. When I write my private trust, they're strictly governed by the exclusive jurisdiction of equity, as opposed to this quasi version of equity that does exist at law. All right, and so I don't want to get too detailed, but you need to know someone who understands the public side if you're going to utilize the public side, but don't look at the public side as being wrong or not fit for purpose. It can be very fit for purpose and it all boils down to having the right trustee, whether on the private side just as much as the public side. If you've got a rubbish trustee on the public side, you're in trouble. If you've got a rubbish trustee on the private side, you're equally in trouble, because the trustee is the face of your trust. They need to know the purpose of it. They need to understand who they're protecting, and what they say can make or break anything. So, quite frankly, it's all down to the trustees that you choose, and if they know what they're talking about. If you're in the public side, you need a good lawyer or someone who understands a trust administration very, very well to be a good trustee and not violate or disclose your private trusts. And I know lots of trustees on the public side that do a very good job of kicking, nefarious creditors and everybody else to the curb to defend the trust and for the trust to do its job. So It's still private in terms of not divulging your private information, not divulging your what you're protecting, etc. It's just not private in terms of the rules of the land, in terms of taxation, which is the biggest issue. Okay, I don't want to go into too much more detail because we'll be here all night. But ultimately, that's the biggest difference. Okay. So Emery asks, could we have money in a private trust if it was called substance rather than currency? You're very close, Emery. I mean, nuances in terminology is a very big deal. But it does boil down to what it really is. But if you define it in such a way that in a way that it's it may not be construed as cash, then why not? I can't say yes or no, but you're definitely on the right lines. So you're thinking outside the box. Terminology is a big deal in a lot of things. Okay. So great question there. Right. So we've hit the 30-minute mark. It is a live stream. I don't want to keep you here all night. One more question coming through. If you're not the trustee, will it still be your trust? It's not the trustee's trust, even if you are the trustee. Yeah. Um, the trustee's job is to administrate and run the trust. In equity, the true owner of a trust is actually the beneficiary. Just to be technical, all right. But the trustee has a lot of responsibility, depending on the powers given to them, and that's another big deal between the private trust and the public trust. That element of discretion is a big deal as well. So that's something else that needs to be discussed. Maybe not tonight, but that is something that's a big element as well. The powers that you confer to a trustee in a private trust, especially ones under equity jurisdiction, it may not be as given a lot of flexibility to trustees. Whereas public trusts, depending on what type, can be extremely flexible for trustees, and you may need that flexibility to do what you need to achieve certain aims. And so, private trust may not be the way forward under the definition of private trust, which I've given you. Okay, so just be careful of that as well. All right. So, if you've got any more specific questions, then feel free to message me. I can answer them. If we have money in a trust, can we get a loan from it to live and buy food? Now, see, that's a great question. It's a loaded question. So, give you a very general answer. If you're using trust and you understand how trusts work and you understand how loans work, then pretty much that's the way you want to be living. Without going into too much more detail, you're definitely on the right lines, Bryce. Okay, very powerful way of operating. But yeah, I can't go into too much more detail on a live stream like this, but you're definitely on the right lines. Okay. So I'm gonna wrap it up there. Okay. One more question, I think, or comment. And you confirm that you can be settlor, and yes, you definitely can be the settlor and a beneficiary. Okay. You could be all three, depending on how many parties you have. All right. So be very careful. But yes, you can be a settlor and a beneficiary. They're three separate offices. Just remember that. All right. No problem, Bryce. You're more than welcome. And thank you all for your time, because time is very precious, and I don't aim to waste anyone's time, and it can't be given back. So you spent time with me. I do appreciate that. Thank you for your time. Thank you for just being in this space. I do appreciate that. Whether you're on YouTube, whether you're on Facebook, I don't take it for granted in any way, shape, or form. So all I can ask you to do is just please, especially if you're on YouTube, just like, subscribe if you haven't subscribed to the channel, share it if you wish to share it. That'd be really good, beneficial to me. If you're on Facebook, tell the world, join the group, find out more about private trusts, how they work. Fantastic. Guys, ladies, gentlemen, have a brilliant evening. If you're watching this on the replay, thank you for your time as well. See you guys real soon. All right. Cheers, everyone.